and queers who forget about struggling to adult, we're struggling to human.
At least that's what everyone's telling us.
You're right.
Per usual. Hey, I'm Angela, bringing sense to the conversation. From here on my soapbox, I shed light on the things society doesn't want you to talk about. You know, the real shit that matters: intersectional thinking, sexuality, queerness, neurodiversity, consent, and the fact that self care is bullshit. For me, it's all about community and how we can care for each other.
And I'm Molly, giving a big fork you to cookie cutter solutions. I help burnt out, busy as fuck, neurodivergent, and queer entrepreneurs make shit happen by providing out of the box solutions and sustainable systems to grow your biz. For me, it's all about doing what makes sense for your brain.
Enough with the chit chat. Let's get to it.
Keep listening, and together we'll explore the drudgery, dreams, and all that shit in between. Get ready to call bullshit on what everyone's saying you should be doing,
as we navigate the spectrum between what really matters to you and the shit keeping you from it.
Hey, everybody.
Good morning.
Back. And as you can see, there's another third person next to us.
Yes, and if you are listening, you can't see, but there is another third person with us today. And we are so excited.
And it's
I'm excited to be here.
Yay, Rebecca. Rebecca has been here before. And the last time she was on, we were talking about just helping our little neurodivergent kiddos in school and all those things. And I'm so excited for her to be back. It's actually great timing that you're back for the subject, actually, which is why we did the episode at this time. Is because it's IEP season for a huge chunk of the neurodivergent tiny humans in our lives. And we already have a comment. Rebecca, you have a fan.
Rockstar extraordinaire. This is so true. This is so true.
I am loved by amazing people.
Yes. Today we are talking about advocating either as the older students who are neurodivergent to advocate for themselves, or as parents or guardians of neurodivergent humans during these IEP meetings, and how to really have a collaborative effort in these meetings that can be so draining for any human, especially if you're also a neurodivergent parent, guardian yourself. And I was thinking about it, like a lot of us, a lot of you that listen to this podcast, were diagnosed as adults. And so you have this unique perspective going into these meetings of, I did this as a kid because I wasn't getting this support. I should advocate in the meeting for this. But I think one of the things, which I might be going off of the questions that we prescribed, is that a lot of parents do not realize how much they can advocate for in an IEP meeting. True. And that's something I've been learning. This will be our third round of IEP meetings. And I feel like every meeting I'm more adamant, more word vomity, because I'm like, you need to understand these things, not in a mean way. But
and let's say too that it's not just IEPs, right? This is any time your child needs support. And so the things that we will talk about today will support any kind of advocacy, whether it's self-advocacy or advocating for anything. Really, it's going to pertain to advocacy in general, not only for IEPs or 504 plans, for those who are lucky enough to have that support in place. But before we get going, let me actually introduce Rebecca. See, we're so excited. We're just like jumping right in. Rebecca,
everybody knows Rebecca. She's amazing. They know her, right?
Right. Everybody knows her already. This is true. Okay, Rebecca Weiner, M.Ed, is a dynamic educator, lifelong learner, and creator of Learn, Play, Grow educational consulting. She supports transformational growth for young children with diverse abilities and their families, teachers, and schools through play-based learning, parent and teacher coaching, and inclusion support in schools. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here with both of you.
Yes.
It's our favorite.
It's yes. I mean, I get all nerdy anytime we're talking about advocating for kiddos. So,
Rock on,
we got another
comment.
We have more praise for Rebecca. She is totes amazing. She rocks it out with her little learners and their fams. I would hire her if I had a kiddo myself for sure.
I mean,
I
it's
feel like
true.
it's a unique opportunity for you.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, if you do not already follow Rebecca's socials, I do highly recommend it because there's lots of great information and resources in there. So we will make sure that we share all of that today so that people have easy, quick access to all of those links.
I'm getting some interesting feedback this week on the Passover and Easter resources I've shared, including the social story for preparing children for an Easter egg hunt. This all started with a family that had a home church, and one of their children was autistic and the other's neurotypical, and nobody was going to celebrate because Easter egg hunts were very triggering. So when I worked with the parents and the grandparents, we took the perspective of the child that he knows that you have candy and you've intentionally hid it from him. And then you invited these traitorous others to steal it from him. So he must do it. And if we understand from his perspective why he was aggressing during the Easter egg hunt, we could then write a social story and do some play and invite those very people over to play hide and seek or treasure hunt. And then the day of, they called and said, all of our kids got to celebrate. This ritual is now alive for everyone because we made it accessible. It's one of my favorite stories.
I love that story.
And I feel like that, and this kind of feeds into what we're going to talk about anyway. I mean, obviously it does, but oh my gosh, I'm talking today. Is like we have to take the perspective of the kiddo,
yes,
in order to help them do anything. And I have a story about my kiddo. Like nobody understood when my kiddo was throwing a fit, except that an adult took the golf club while we were golfing that was associated with Blaine's name and then golfed all the balls. Obviously, those were stolen.
Yes.
And there were significant ramifications for this. And everybody kept being like, don't treat your mama that way. I'm like, oh, no. This has nothing to do with me. We have totally done something harmful in the perspective of this child.
Right.
And this lashing out is acceptable. If somebody came to your house and stole all your belongings, you'd be pissed too. Like,
yes.
So it's great to have these perspectives of like, okay, but how do they perceive that? And I think that is probably point number one of today's thing is exactly what you said. We have to get in their perspective when we're advocating in the IEP, like in the classroom, this child, for those of you watching, my camera just focused. We are all happy. Distraction. In the classroom, when one child does something and your little is or is not involved, and they have some type of emotional response to that, and you know that's going to happen, if we do not give a heads up to the teacher, the para, whoever, that that's how they respond in those types of situations, let's prep with a social story, let's prep with practicing, let's prep with all these things, we're going to have a giant emotional response to that. And then as adults, we're going to be like, that child is overreacting, because that's our first response half the time.
Yes.
Well,
we ground in our adult feelings and our adult perception. And then I see two patterns happen. One is we talk the child out of their feelings. Oh, it's not so bad. Don't cry. Everything's going to be okay. Or we punish them for their reaction without understanding the need behind the behavior. And then we've totally alienated them from any sense of relief or closure because now we're berating and lecturing. We've missed the teachable moment, and it's just going to keep happening.
Yes. I think the best advice I got ever was there's a point of no return.
Yes.
In any emotional outburst of a child, once you get to the like super heightened, super stimmy, trying to regulate, screaming, hitting, there's no learning moment at that point.
No, the teachable moment always comes when people are calm.
Yeah.
Yes. And the one thing I know I'm kind of getting off topic, but I do tell the teaching team this is if we get to a point of no return, and I explain what a point of no return looks like, do not circle back. Do not circle back.
Yes.
Because then we're going to start over. And I feel like so many times teachers who haven't worked with kiddos specifically, like, well, they've never worked with your kiddo, so it's always going to be new. They always want to try and circle back and go, oh, now that you're calm, let's talk about that thing that made you totally dysregulated and wanted like eat children's legs under the table, because that's what my child tried to do.
But legs are delicious, so why wouldn't you?
We were watching Plants vs. Zombies. It seemed rational at the time.
Yes.
So like that not circle, like I feel like I am talking us in a circle here, but I think the point is, as the parent advocating for the kiddo, I have learned that it's okay to say, we have found that this does not work.
Yes.
So please put this in your do not use toolkit.
Yes.
Or trash can, however you want to put it.
Yes. And that requires the teacher to have both the cognitive flexibility and the emotional vulnerability to step out of what they know and what they've done and see it from a different perspective, and to trust you as the parent or guardian, and to trust the child that that strategy has an opportunity to work, which can feel like a big ask.
It is sometimes. And I feel like I'm missing the questions we had predetermined. So I'm going to go back to Angela here, because I'm like just so excited to talk to you.
Can I share a quick story related to what you were saying?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So we're talking about advocacy, and sometimes advocacy happens before we've even referred for assessment, diagnosis, and intervention.
Yes.
And I spent some time in a school this spring with a little learner who didn't understand his body in space. And so whenever somebody came close to him, his body would stiffen, he would growl, and he would lash out to hit or grab or choke. And the adults were concerned about the behavior without understanding the unmet need. Now, what would happen on the playground, where we have this large, open, unstructured space and no one to guide the play, is that there would be a lot of aggression. And so the plan was originally, let's remove the child from the setting, and we're going to keep everybody safe. And I coached the teachers and the administrators that, to the greatest extent possible, I encourage you to stay present with the child. So, for example, I observed the child hit another child because he wanted the tricycle. And so I put a barrier between me and the child who'd been hit to communicate, you are safe and I will protect you. And then the child who did the hitting, I narrated for him, you really want a turn. You feel mad. And then gave him the words, you can say, my turn, please. And what happened there was that we had a teachable moment. He got to practice that skill in context. His peer got to practice hearing him and responding appropriately. If we had whisked him away and berated him about not hitting, that would have been stigmatizing for him. His peers would have learned that they have to escape him, and he would have missed the opportunity to practice the skill in context. So sometimes what we think is therapeutic or meaningful actually causes more problems and keeps the cycle going. And this is for a child who has yet to be referred. And all the parents here are the hitting and the kicking and the choking. Well, we can change that narrative when we understand what his body needs and give him an opportunity to practice those skills in context.
Yes. And that brings up another, like that. Thank you for telling that story, because that triggered something else for me. Not in a bad way. Just thoughts. But I am the parent that no other parent likes, because they'll be like, your kid hit my kid. And I go, what did your kid do?
Real question.
My kid acts out violently when provoked. Their natural instinct is not, let me go eat people. Like, that's not the normal reaction. But if everybody's being mean to me and everybody's hurting my feelings, whether as an adult it's rational or irrational to us, that's beside the point.
Right.
I always am like, okay, but what happened?
Yes.
Or, and there are certain rules. Like, I always tell the teachers, if my child cusses, there's a reason. I don't want to hear that my child got in trouble for saying a quote unquote bad word, because A, they're words, and B, there was a reason. They use them grammatically correct. get to the bottom of it. If
Yes.
they are only cussing when they're angry and they're not eating a human, we're winning.
Right. And again, this
So,
requires an understanding of behavior as communication. Behavior is the communication of an unmet need or an unlearned
right.
skill. And when we respond to the behavior, we perpetuate it. When we see and meet the need, we prevent it from happening again. And then we shift the environment and the relationships that shaped that behavior so that everybody wins.
Yes. And the other one in like a similar scenario is teachers always want to force kids to apologize.
Can we say
And it
no?
makes me angry. Oh, I say no. I tell them at the IEP meeting, Blaine is not required to apologize. Blaine is required to make sure that if they injured somebody and they're in a space where they can be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, not sorry. Are you okay? Because
Right.
they might have hit that person because that was the valid feeling they were having. And if they don't feel sorry, I'm not making my child like that's contradictory to their emotions and we're invalidating their feelings.
And
And
they
that
don't
pisses people
understand
off.
what it means.
Right.
Having 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds apologize is not developmentally appropriate. They don't understand the meaning. And all too often, it's words that they parrot and then keep the same behavior happening. So they don't break the cycle. And let's also talk about the child that get hurt or cursed at. They might not be ready to be in the presence of the person that they perceived hurt them. So in bringing the child back to do the quote unquote right thing by apologizing, we're re-traumatizing the child that feels that they got hurt. Why can't we just let them both feel safe and sit with our adult discomfort that this has not been wrapped up with a neat bow following our social norms? It's an adult issue, not a child issue.
It is. And a lot of things are adult issues, not child issues.
Yes.
Like the more I learn about parenting and child development and psychology, it's all adult issues.
Let's be
It's
real.
very rarely actual child issues.
Children have very little power in the world. Therefore, it is highly unlikely that they are both the source or the solution to the problem. It is our perception and response to the child that creates the problem. But it's so easy to judge the child and think that the problem is inherent to them, which excuses us from needing to restructure the environment or invest in relationships. And then we keep that cycle going and kick the can down the road until something explosive happens. And then, well, we always knew about Timmy. No, Timmy deserved a better chance.
And speaking of Timmy, who I know we made up that name for a minute.
To all the Timmys in the world, we love you.
Yes. I want to talk about our chromodiverse kiddos because I've been seeing a lot of like, they're here, we let them be in school, but not a lot of actual like trying to incorporate them as much as possible into curriculum. There's very little inclusion or equity at that point. And I have heard several people complain about, well, they sent so-and-so home because he sneezed today. Or like different, they're coming up with excuses to not deal with XYZ. When as a parent of a differently unique child, I see some parallels and I'm like, oh, well, why don't you go try this? And then they're like, oh, that worked. And so how have you, I don't know, I don't want you to speak to any obviously specific instances, but like, I'm going to shut up and just let you talk because I feel like in that vein of things, how have you seen things kind of should play out, not have seen play out, but should.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we have diverse children that are placed in schools, and we believe that the placement itself makes it inclusive. And then when the tools and strategies to support that child, their peers, their teachers, and their families are not in place, we come up with excuses. You know, they got a paper cut, the wind blew in Milwaukee. There's always a reason, but we have to send the child home. Well, firstly, that's against the law. We don't send children home because we don't know how to cope with them. They have a legal right to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. But also, inclusion is a culture, not a placement. Putting children with disabilities in a classroom doesn't make it inclusive. If all you do is place them there, you've actually set them, their peers, and their teachers up to fail. If, however, there is differentiated instruction that benefits all of the children, if, however, that teacher can consult with the child's therapist or special educator and administrator and get the support that they need, that's fostering a culture of inclusion. Over the last few years within my community, I've reset my perspective on inclusion. For a few years, I supported students at a school that was content to have children with disabilities so long as the families provided one-on-one support. And I found that frustrating and inequitable. And then I went with a client to another school, and it is my perception, not theirs, that they are content to have children with disabilities by denying the fact that they have disabilities and not communicating what's happening at school with the family at home. So if I take a broader perspective, where I started was actually a much more inclusive place. So now circling back with that school and being able to do consulting rather than being hired by a family to shadow a child and help that entire class, being able to go into multiple classrooms, observe, reflect, make recommendations, coach teachers, have them audition and troubleshoot strategies in real time with actual students is transformational for their teaching, because they're going to have a Timmy next year and the year after that. But what we do is isolate the issue in that specific child, and then we don't glean what we could to take forward. We make it the child's issue. So if it's a matter of placement, at best, that's mainstreaming, but that's not inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right, that comes back to that place of equality and equity, and let's take that one step further. Justice are not the same things. And what we really want is when we talk inclusion, we're not specifically talking inclusion. We're talking justice.
Yes.
Which is what everybody deserves.
Yes.
So,
may I share a story on that line before we pivot?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So
always.
I am supporting inclusion in a classroom, and my little learner tends to be in very close proximity to other people's bodies. And the occupational therapist's idea was, let's write a social story about appropriate personal space. And my question was, what is the need behind being so close to people? Could it be that this student needs the presence of another person to co-regulate? Could it be that this person is seeking input and another person's body is the source of that input? So again, rather than trying to preach neurotypical norms, why don't we get busy understanding what the child actually needs? And it turns out she was seeking proprioceptive input. So she got a weighted lovey that she could carry wherever she went, that grounded her body in space. And then the teacher reaches out and said, I'm so glad that this lovey is working, but we got 19 other kids. We can't have everyone with a lovey. And my response was, why not?
Why not?
And so we talked about the difference between equality and equity. She's worried about needing everybody. What if everybody decides that they want that? Well, what if everybody decides that they want that? Maybe not just my student, but other students could benefit from this. And I am so proud to say we came back from spring break, and this teaching team had the children color on socks, filled them with beans and a hint of lavender oil, tied them up, and now they have a house for their loveys that they can access at any time. And lo and behold, it is not a lovey fest flying through the air, dragging on the floor, as teachers might have feared. But the openness of that teacher to acknowledge this child gets what she needs because that's what she needs, and we can make that available, and the children who need it will access it, and the children who don't won't. But we're erasing that stigma, and we're supporting equity. And wouldn't you know, a bunch of children actually need that. It's helping them. And we might not have known that that could be helpful if we hadn't tried it. So I am in awe of that teaching team and their openness and their flexibility. That's inclusion. Inclusion is not about, tell me how I can make this child do something. Inclusion is, help me know what I need to do to support this child. And that's what the teaching team is doing.
Right. And I have found that we had a very great teaching team this year. And so when we were going to those meetings, it was, I know that you are I acknowledged all of their things, just like we acknowledge with the kiddos when we're trying to be, I acknowledge that you are one person in a room of who knows how many people with all their unique needs. And it's not like I know how many are on IEPs, 504s, whatever the heck. So I'm here to help you, but I'm going to word vomit a lot of things trying to help you. And so but like you said, they don't know what they don't know. And how,
Exactly.
if I think back to myself, I was a high masking kid who thought that I wasn't worth communicating my struggles and things. And so I am sure there are a lot of neurodivergent. I mean, I know I'm one person, but usually if I'm thinking it, somebody else is probably thinking it too.
Mhm.
And so I'm sure there's a ton of neurodivergent kiddos or just sensory issued kids. That's not the right word, but you guys know what I'm talking about. And who need those things but don't know how to communicate it because it's not something their family probably talks about,
Yeah.
and they don't feel like they're allowed to talk about it. And so it's like we advocate for our kiddos, but by advocating for our kiddos, other kids get to see how things could be, and if those are
Yes.
helpful, that makes our kiddos also an advocate for their friends without
Yes.
teaching it slowly and helping them. Okay, I know you had a question, Angela, so I'll stop talking.
Well, let's just take that one and let's look at self-advocacy.
Mm.
So the parents have a role, but the parents aren't there all day. The teachers and the other adult advocates are not always going to be there. So when we are working on advocacy and we are working with these children, one of the goals that we have is for them to learn how to self advocate. And that is the responsibility of the family, the teachers, the teaching team, the other staff at the school. Can you give us some insight on that, on how they can help support with the common goals, right? That often are self-identified by the child rather than identified by the adults, or should be. I said it should be. How do we move into that space of self-advocacy?
Number one, believe the child. We need to stop talking children out of what they think they need. If we're insecure that we can't provide it, we need to own that, but stop denying what they say is true for them. My little learners are learning to ask, can I eat that if they have food allergies or they're gluten intolerant? Can I play with that? Sometimes the Play-Doh has gluten in it and a child will have a response. So helping them know what their body needs and then be able to ask questions. And for the children who use mouth words to communicate, that might be, can I do that? Is that safe for my body? For other children, it might be a picture of take a break or the sensory room. In every case, when children know what their body needs and they have the tools to advocate, they make exponentially more progress, and the teachers are exponentially less burnt out because the need is being met. As children get older, I'm a fan of involving them in these meetings.
Yes, yes.
I mean, nothing about me without me. Children can advocate and they have the right to object to something or to say, well, I'm really interested in learning about this thing. Can we write more goals for that? Or that behavior plan is really scary for me. I don't like it when Mr. So and so touches my body. They
Yep.
have a right to share that input. I think it all speaks to the underlying idea, this kind of paternalistic, maternalistic idea that we know better than children what children need. And I
Yeah.
think if we slow down and watch and listen and trust, they will show us exactly what they need. It's not about our certainty that we've checked the box and we've done the thing. It's about being attuned and responsive. And that thing is going to keep changing, which is where advocacy comes in.
Yeah.
Yes, which I'm trying not to change subjects. Um, and I feel like that, especially with teenagers, I feel like teenagers with IEP plans need to be the most involved rather than the parent. Like They
Yes.
need to be the ones saying, I am struggling in these different areas. I need these things. And if we've taught them up to this point that like every year's a new year, or if you need to change, can change the IEP. Like if they've been taught how to advocate during these meetings by watching us as the parents advocate or their teaching team advocate for them, then as they get older, they can do that. But even an 8-year-old, or like, I know this year my little one will be a little bit more involved, and we've been prepping with the therapist on like what is most scary about first grade, so that we know going into the meeting, riding the bus,
Yeah.
which we didn't know was going to be a thing. Well, I mean, we do now, but they're scared that their coping mechanisms that keep them motivated are going to disappear. And so we're going to try and incorporate those things. Like, so it's been, regardless of the age, a lot of times they can
Yes.
participate in their age appropriate or developmentally appropriate stage for them.
That is
But
so beautiful that you are setting your child up for success from the minute they leave the house. If they were not included in this process and you didn't know that just the experience of riding the bus would be so intensely dysregulating that they wouldn't be able to reset to 100 and would be depleted by the time they got to school, then no learning strategies that were proposed would change that. But you trusted the child to know, this is what I'm scared of, so let's actually address that.
Yes. You're not allowed to make me cry today, Rebecca. That is a rule.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Purple monkey.
Well, Molly touched on exactly what I was going to say, and that is these kids, and a lot of times the parents too, or other individuals who are involved, they need the opportunities to practice.
Yes.
Right? Like, here's what happens as a teacher sitting in IEP meetings, or in some cases as the administrator sitting in those meetings. They're thrown in there. They have no idea what's coming. They've gotten this 25-page plan. If they don't have a plan and they're in the processes of evaluation, there's fear, there's this unknown, and there are no processes in place to support.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that really needs to change. Is there needs to be somebody available who is not a high price consultant, that a family who is making, $20,000 a year and their wealth is $200, then they don't have access to that. It is the school's responsibility to provide that, and that's a program that needs to be put in place so that self-advocacy can happen. And that's inclusion as well.
Amen. A woman, them there. Rock on.
That's a good point to bring up, the kiddos that are in foster care as well. So that's the unique, there's that unique situation as well, where there's these kiddos that are moving person to person and they don't have a stable person advocating for them. I know several people that are IEP advocates, and they do their best to help these kiddos. But even that's a weird situation, because you're like, I talked to this kid for 30 minutes and now I'm going to try and help them in this one situation. And so I feel like that, hopefully, if you are one of those people, that this episode helps bring you some ideas, because you're not the parent who lives with that kiddo, or necessarily the foster parent who lives with that kiddo. You're there advocating because you know the process a little bit more. And I hope, if you are listening and you're in that situation, that we're giving you a little bit of some guidance or like starting points to help you in that. Because I know not everybody in that situation has done it a bunch of times. So,
yes. Yeah. So let me bring up this quote that I read last week. This is by Jen Shonger. We have an interventionist culture that tells us that disability is bad and we must intervene as quickly as possible with goals of normalcy and independence. Again, we need to ask whose agenda is being served. And isn't that beautiful? So here, in all of these situations, instead of spending all of our time, effort, and energy trying to change the child's behavior, we need to ask that question, whose agenda is being served by this behavior change? And let's be honest, it's not the child's.
Yes.
And then let's go that step further and say we could spend our time, effort, and energy on helping this person advocate for their needs, helping them become self-aware so they
Yes.
can advocate for their needs. That is a much better way of spending our time, effort, and energy,
Yes.
but that's not what happens most of the time.
Right.
You
And
are so
I
right.
and I kind of gauge when we need to tweak something or when we need to, and I can only talk from our experience, but like when I need to reach out to the teaching team and have like an impromptu meeting, when the level of fallout when my kiddo gets home. So when
Mhm.
our mask gets taken off and we get to unmask, how bad is the fallout from that? And if it's like they just want to sit on the couch and chill out, okay, that's this. I mean, I would it is them. I don't know if that's them fully falling out like or not, but it seems fine. But if they come home and they're screaming and fits and rage and exhaustion, like, okay, what happened today?
Yeah.
What needs to happen? Is this happening all the time? Like, um, and so I do want to point out like the kiddos will tell us even though they're not telling us like with words. It's like you said their behaviors and why are they doing it. And so like as you're gauging like looking back on the year this year as you prep for this IEP meeting, just from my own experience, I would say look back at how many days like of the week, like was it every Thursday that you were like, dang, my child is like a hellball fury after school on Thursdays. Or like my kids really love Tuesdays. Like
Right.
Yeah.
Look for the
what are
patterns.
those things?
Look
Yeah.
for the patterns.
Um
Yeah. Because
Look.
here's what happens. Molly, you have a lot of structures and supports in place.
I do.
But
Mhm.
here is what, especially working in, in schools in areas where the socioeconomic, we've got 95% poverty in the schools.
Yeah.
The parents, the kid maybe is good all day in school, good, quote unquote,
Mhm.
right? And then they get home and they're hell on wheels.
Yep.
They
Yeah.
don't sleep, all of these things. These parents hold massive amounts of shame and guilt because the school, when the parent does ask a question and try to self advocate for
Yeah.
themselves and then advocate for their child, the school say, oh, no, their behavior is perfect. I
Mm.
say to these parents, push it. If that kid is behaving perfectly all day long at school and then they're falling out at home, is there something happening at school? Because these are good parents. These are
Yeah.
loving homes. These are, the stability that they can have. Because, a lot of times the schools will say, oh, well, it's an unstable home environment. BS. BS. Because they're not having the same issues in the summer when they're not going to school. They don't have the same issues when
Good
they're on
point.
break. So it's not the family's fault. And we've got to stop putting the blame there and start working together.
Yeah.
Abso-freaking-lutely. I see so many parents that are riddled with guilt and shame, and many who have been talked out of their concerns by
Yes.
authority figures, doctors, teachers, administrators, other professionals. Just as we want to teach our learners to be self advocates, we need to honor parents' advocacy.
Yep.
They have a right
Yeah.
to share, I'm concerned about this. This impacts my child's life, which impacts my child's learning, which makes us partners in progress and success. And
Yeah.
I think there also needs to be a shift in how schools communicate with families. So last
Mm-hmm.
fall, in preparation for parent teacher conferences, a teacher told me, well, I'm going to tell the family that they need to get speech therapy because I can't understand him. And I thought the way that that's being framed is that the family needs to do something because you're having a difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
What if we were to explain that as we think that he would benefit from speech therapy in ways that would help him better access the curriculum and engage with his peers and build meaningful relationships. Here are a few strategies that we've tried, and we'd like to continue building on that, which is very different from I have a problem. If I were that parent, I'd be like, go get your hearing checked. That sounds like a personal problem. Why do I need to get therapy for that?
Is it a public school? Why isn't the school speech pathologist helping?
This was a private school, but I thought,
oh, okay.
wow.
But even so, in the public schools, let's be honest, the resources are not there. And again, I'm going to bring this up every damn time. Equity and justice. Equity and justice. The less money that the school has, aka the school is in a setting that has a high poverty ratio, they have less resources. So now the parents don't have the resources. They don't get insurance. They don't have the ability to, maybe they're going out and trying to get credit to send their kid to therapy because the school says that's what they need, because the school doesn't have the resources in place either. But if you're wealthy and you're white and you're heterosexual and you fall into all of these things that are quote unquote normal, then you get to be well and you get to learn how to advocate or have an advocate or have somebody support you. So it's not just a matter of, is it a public school? They should be doing this. It's, are the resources available and how can we get them into the most needed spaces?
Yes.
That's true.
And can I just drop a subtle hint that mayhaps if we stopped attaching school funding to areas where people live and just spread it out equally, those resources would be there.
But my tax dollars shouldn't have to pay for that school. Oh, that's the us and them mentality. That's the self-care narrative, BS, instead of community care, where we take our privilege that we have and share it with others so that our community can be well.
Yes. Those very same tax dollars are paying for the jails because of our school to prison pipeline. So if what you want to do is save money, you're going to have to spread this out. There's a wonderful book, and I'm not recalling the title off the top of my head, that looks at how racism and classism actually shoots rich white people in the foot.
We got to find that resource. We will find that resource and share it with y'all.
Yes, it is an amazing book. And I did not realize about integrating public pools, that white people just closed their community pools rather than let Black people swim in them. That redlining actually reduced values of white people. But as long as I have and they get less, I will accept less as long as they have less than me. And like, y'all.
Yes.
Yeah. Knock it off. Knock it off. That's so funny that you brought up redlining. Molly and I talked about that last week for like 2 hours.
Yeah, we did. We were talking about how not every white person knows what redlining is, and that is a problem in and of itself.
Would you like to define it so that those listening and watching have context?
Oh, I'm gonna fuck this up. Essentially, it's purposely changing boundary lines so that when the communities that want to be rich get to be rich, and the communities that they don't want to be rich don't have anything, or have very little.
Land beyond the red line is worth less, and people who want to live there cannot qualify for loans. It just so happens that that's the BIPOC community. Total coincidence, not intentional, not systemic, doesn't need to be changed.
And for anybody out there who doesn't get the sarcasm,
right?
That was like totally she's being sarcastic. Yes.
Those who know the children's book Harold and the Purple Crayon, I want to like come around with a different color crayon and cover all of those red lines and be like, we are all one big community, and what's happening over there impacts what's happening over there. Like in our community, for example, we live in a humid subtropical climate. We've had massive hurricanes and repeated floods. So much of our community is still rebuilding from the first flood, and then 2 more came. Do you not realize that nature does not rain on certain zip codes. We're all impacted by these greater forces, but certain zip codes get rebuilt and others do not.
Do
Right.
not.
Right.
Um,
The rain is
and
different.
Yes.
yes, and I am changing subjects for a second and going back a little bit because I just want to say, if I'm in Nebraska, so currently I'm in an area that the schools have a lot of money, but I have also been in places that the schools just don't have funding and there's not a lot of stuff. And I just want to say this out loud for parents who have tried to go through like the early intervention program and been denied, but they still feel like something's up. Or they've gone to the school system and they're like, sorry, yeah, that sounds right, but too bad. If I realize that not everybody has the economic power to do certain things. There is a lot of power in researching on the internet, acknowledging that this aligns with what you think your kiddo is doing, and trying to find coping mechanisms or ways to approach things or ways to change your mindset to help them. So when we're talking about different ways that parents can support their kiddos, especially if you've already tried the avenues that your state powers that be give you, that doesn't mean you have to stop. That doesn't mean that what
Absolutely.
you're feeling is there isn't there. It is there, because if your gut, as a parent, you have a gut reaction when you're like,
Yes.
that's not right. Like right now, people keep saying, oh, no worries about dyslexia. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you, I know for a fact this is an issue. Um, and so you get that gut reaction. Trust your gut as the parent,
Yes.
research, do what you can. I realize you might not have a little time. So even if that's like half the time my research is in the bathroom,
Let's be real.
like
That's
whatever
true.
you can do, the 2 minutes while you're stirring vegetables, whatever you're doing, just trust your gut. And our big thing is you have power to change how your child experiences their life, and that can be different than yours.
That is so important.
Yes. And then a sideline on that, because this has been pointed out to me, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but oh well. If your partner keeps avoiding going to the IEP meetings with you, they might be doing that for a reason. Sometimes these types of meetings trigger a lot of trauma for
Yeah.
parents. And so if you are the parent that can go and your partner cannot, because of maybe they did tell you, maybe they didn't, it's not because they don't care. It's because they know that they would not be able to advocate the way that child needs without being triggered and reliving their own trauma. So I did want to point that out because that is something that I've seen happen with other parents. So
Yes, that compassion and grace is necessary. And if I may, I'd like to share two tangible tips.
Yes,
One,
please.
families often don't know what their rights are. So they'll come to the school with the I'm concerned about, here's this Google article, and it stops there. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act manual, which can be found online, will walk you through every step from requesting a full individual evaluation to navigating the IEP meeting to how you can contest or advocate. Two, if you come to the school, don't just share information, include an ask. I'm concerned about this. I would like my child assessed for that. I'm concerned about this. I would like to meet with this team of people. Often the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you come and you ask for something, then you put somebody in a position of having to deny you, which they don't want to do, especially if there's a paper trail. So learn your rights through IDEA and make a specific ask. And I remember as a teacher advocating and a supervisor saying, Rebecca, do you realize that you are asking for a disproportionate amount of support? To which I responded, do you realize that there's a disproportionate number of incident reports with your signature on them?
Bravo. Yes,
Like, who is
absolutely.
this going to come back to bite? Never mind the child is getting hurt, but when push comes to shove, I'm okay being the pushy teacher. I'm
Yep.
advocating for a child that can't advocate for themselves. On paper, you look like a negligent administrator. That's not good.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to the equity and justice piece for just a minute. Not everybody is able to read.
Yes.
Also
Not
true.
everybody has access to. Look, this just popped up. Is that ADA manual in multiple languages? Would you be able to drop the link in, please? We will drop the link in, and that's exactly what I was just getting ready to say. Is not everybody has access to that information. Number one, because the only internet that they have is on their phone, and that's small and it's difficult to read, or it doesn't hold the download because it's a lot of information.
Right.
There are not community computers available. People are like, well, just go to the library. Well, you know what? There aren't libraries everywhere. Cars and public transportation and all of that are not available everywhere. So again, we have this equity issue, and there are people who you can ask to support that. Although the stigma is there of going in and saying, I'm not able to read this. Can you help me access this? And then there is the language, which federal law says that we must provide translators for and interpreters for all of this, but oftentimes that's over the phone, and it's not somebody who's sitting down with you.
Yes.
So there are a lot of issues like that as well. And this is where advocacy comes in. And if you have to start pushing at that level to get access to those resources so that you can advocate for your child, do that. Find support to do that. Find somebody else in the community to do that. Message us. Let's find a not-for-profit group that helps. Like, you are not alone in this. You do not have to do this alone. Because again, this is a community issue, not a personal, you have to do this all by yourself issue.
Absolutely. I would love to give a shout out to a local organization here in Houston, Texas. Family to Family Network is a nonprofit that pairs parents with other parents. So parents who have the lived experience of navigating healthcare, education, community living, benefits. There's no substitute for lived experience.
Right.
So rather than me as a professional trying to preach what I know on paper, pairing parents with other parents or caregivers with other caregivers, that peer support is so empowering. And then that person becomes not only somebody that gives you information, but they give you emotional support and a sounding board, which builds the resilience to keep advocating.
Yep, absolutely. One last question, because not only is it advocacy season, that shouldn't even be a thing, but unfortunately it is. We look at
Every day is
IEPs once a
Advocacy Day.
year, and we should be doing this all of the time, but time, energy, resources, all of those things. It is also time to transition. Depending on where you live, it is also time to transition. And what I have noticed is, as state assessments and things come, and that's an episode in and of itself, the realization that the school year is coming to an end comes as well. And this is not just a difficult time for students. As we start seeing behaviors and things like that, when you look at reports in schools, April is one of those months where you see higher levels of incidences and things like that happening. That's not because the child's behavior necessarily increase. Why don't we look at how the teachers are feeling, and that they're getting to this point of exhaustion? But also, a lot of teachers, whether they know it or not, are neurodivergent, and the transition out of the school year and into a summer routine and not having access to their classroom for 2 months, and their classroom is their safe space. I may or may not be
to mention
speaking
not
from
getting paid.
Yes.
Right. So that can all be, at this time of year, very difficult. What can we do, parents, teachers, staff, students, what can be done to support that specific issue?
That is a fantastic question. I'd love to think about that out loud together. How do we
Number one,
validate?
let's acknowledge it and understand that it's
Yes,
there, because that is what
yes,
is missing right now.
yes,
And I think as a parent, when we always are coming to a teacher with a question, we should always be like, "Hey, I know you're super busy, and I know you are thinking about a lot of things. You can answer this if you have time,
hmm,
whenever. Here's my question. If you don't know the answer, that's okay." Like validating their feelings that they're overworked, that they're all the unders and overs,
all the
um,
others.
all the unders and overs, telling them when you need a response, what the
Yes,
question is, and acknowledging that they might not have the answer and that's okay, that you're not expecting them to move the moon. Um,
yes,
I
yes.
mean, that's a year-round thing, but I think especially so right now. Um,
And
that's one thing that I've learned across the
I will
board.
say from my experience, coming back from winter break in January often feels like the restart of the school year,
Yep.
hanging on for dear life until spring break. And then the sprint to the end of the year feels endless.
Yep.
And thrown in there is this magical time called teacher appreciation, where you have to be so excited that for 1 week a year, somebody gives you Starbucks gift cards. And just the performativeness of that, and being exhausted and depleted and not feeling supported, and then feeling like you're supposed to practice gratitude. Maybe this is a separate episode, but this hallmarkification of all of our gratitude and how we save it up. If I told you that your child did a great job on a collaborative project in October, but I didn't tell you until May, would that be very helpful? No. And
Right.
like, just for anybody who's listening, you cannot compensate teachers for low pay and unrealistic expectations in Starbucks currency. It just doesn't translate.
Right.
We need
But
other ways
here's
to express
something
our
that
gratitude.
could. What would happen if during Teacher Appreciation Week we had conversations with teachers about,
Shut up. They don't have voices.
I know it, I know. What would, and not just teachers, but the everybody, right? All of the staff, every single person in that school. We actively engage in a conversation of, how does transition make you feel? Has anybody noticed the teachers who are not counting down the days to the end of the school year? I was that teacher. Everybody was like, "Oh, we've got 15 days left." And I'm like, "Oh, I
Mm-hmm.
want to keep teaching. I want to teach all year. I don't want to have summer break. No, please don't."
Yep.
Not because I don't love home, not because I don't love my family, but because I have created this safe bubble, right? And I like it. And
Yeah.
the kids feel that way too. And let's stop doing these, yay, only 15 days left.
Yes.
I mean, I know we're talking about teacher appreciation, but I would say a good portion of those kids, that countdown is doom.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Like, we've got to stop doing that.
Yeah.
We've got to stop doing that. And there are so many better things that we can do. Instead of spending our time, effort, and energy on the countdown and marking X's on a freaking calendar, we can spend our time, effort, and energy into having conversations and supporting each other in what that transition looks like.
What if that was built into the spring conference? We're
What
talking
if?
about progresses and challenges. And let's look to the next season coming, when the structure of school, when the childcare that school realistically provides, when the meals that school provides are not there, what supports are in place? How can we create a plan of action? Many of my kiddos need a social story for the end of school. There are all of these countdowns and rituals and graduations, and then a cliff, you fall off into nothing. Well, then
Yes.
what do I do? They need to be reassured that just because Miss or Mr. So and so isn't going to be in their life 5 days a week, there are still going to be attentive, loving adults there to support them.
Yeah.
Angela, you bring
And
up a
I
really good point. We do not think about it from that perspective, and we set
Yeah,
people up
it
to
it's
fail.
that's one reason I make them figure out who blames or who my kiddo's teacher is going to be before our IEP meeting.
Mm,
They say they can't promise it, but they're going to do their best. And usually they choose the person that's going to have the best personality for my kiddo. And
yes.
that allows us to talk about, oh, remember so and so? We met them at this meeting. And then we can talk about them and how that's going to be. but it's not fair to spring a person on a kid or a
Yeah.
teacher with a kid without any legway because or legway, is that a word?
Legwork, segue. It is now.
Sure, sure.
Okay, but like I mean transitions for both the teacher and the student, like
And the parents
and the parents. Oh geez, yeah.
and the staff. Yep.
By not creating any bridge of communication
Yes.
from year to year and just being like, oh, go. Like it's one thing when you're moving to a whole new district and here's this child and we don't know anything. Like that's different. That's
Right.
still a transition and that's a whole other transition for a whole other episode. But in this case, like how do you prep a child for how a teacher is going to respond? How do you prep a teacher for the fact that your kid has interoception issues and you need to just know that they can go to the potty without asking you? Otherwise, you're going to have to clean up pee. Like, well, the teacher isn't, but you know what I mean?
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it
Well,
is the teacher.
okay.
So what I hear you saying is that we need to open those lines of communication and create that bridge, that sense of clarity and calm in knowing what to expect. And often we don't think about that until August. Well, is the teacher going to send a postcard? Are we going to have an open house? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but showing up when the other 27 kids are there and trying to have a conversation with the teacher is not going to be a meaningful introduction. So if we work backward from our goal, we can start setting up for success in spring.
Right.
Yes. And
or telling the teachers that on their own time, it is a requirement that they send letters to the families or that they make personal phone calls to the families. These teachers maybe have 150 kids. Oh,
Yeah.
wait, okay, now we're going to do it by homeroom. And there's this one teacher, and they're going to do that. But the kid actually has 7 teachers.
Yeah.
But they're getting a message from this one. Like, the whole thing just needs to be revamped. It's not going to happen overnight.
Well, and I feel like no. I do feel like the concept of Head Start or like Jump Start is great. Like our school did it this year. They've been doing it for a while, but essentially it's only for kindergarten and first grade. And about a week before school starts, they go for 2 or 3 days for an extremely short day, like 2 or 3 hours, to make sure that all the personalities in the classroom are even and that one teacher doesn't disproportionately have chaos, that chaos is sprinkled. No offense to the chaotic students,
It's
but
my
like
favorite
one
topping,
teacher shouldn't
the
get
chaos sprinkles.
well, like in the sense of like one teacher shouldn't have a completely dysregulated classroom and then everybody else has super regulated classrooms. And then they can like test the kids out, like move people around. Like maybe that kid really needs to be with their bestie from last year to help the transition through. And I think that's great. But I think we need to do it at the end of the year, not at the start of the new one. Because now we can test when the kids are still safe in school and they know their safe teacher. And then you could do that jump start at the end instead of the beginning, or do both where they could test it out. And then, okay, we've been over the summer. Let's double check things are good. Just bridging that gap, because the concept of testing a classroom out is better than be like, well, this is your classroom, tough shit.
I've never heard of this Jumpstart program. This sounds extraordinary.
Oh, it is amazing. I mean, I'm sure it's chaos, as all things are. But I think it's fair to be like, as a teacher, it's not like you're going to get along with every student in the world. Like there are some things that are going to just not work. And if you have the opportunity of multiple classes with multiple, like we have 6 kindergartens or something like that in our school. So there is ability to kind of help, because neither the teacher nor the student are going to have a positive experience if they're, for whatever reason, can't, like it just doesn't work.
And I think
if they dysregulate each other all day long.
Yes. Right. Like that's not fair to either one of them. That kid is not going to learn anything, and that teacher's not going to be able to teach as well as they could. And so it provides this opportunity to like have much better cohesion in a classroom. And then the kids get to see the classroom. And if they did it before they left, then they get to know what the classroom looks like before. And then when they get to do Jumpstart again at the beginning, it's like, oh yeah, this seems familiar. It's not new. I've seen this before. And then we can start the new year so that they kind of get all of those nervous emotions out.
And I know that there are educators out there who are listening and school counselors who create schedules and do that. And they're like, ha, isn't that a cute idea?
No.
Because
I
the
know.
people who are creating the schedules for these kids, especially as they get into higher grades, they work for 3 months solid to create these schedules, looking at what is in the best interest of this kid. Like, I have watched that happen and participated in it myself. So that is again, a whole other episode and a different way of thinking. We need some different kind of AI for that to help support that process because
Well, I
there are
feel
only
like
so many humans.
that brings us full circle to the topic of advocacy, is that we
Yep.
don't need stacked classroom with triggered
Yeah.
teachers and dysregulated children. And I have seen
Mm-mm.
so many classrooms, like, who put all of these kids together so that the majority of teachers and children could have a positive experience? But this looks
Oh,
like it has to
their
happen.
reading intervention level put them together, and now they move together all day long with this person who they just had a fight with, and now they're with them all day long. Right? Like these things happen. You are absolutely correct. Okay, we are well over our time, not surprisingly. But let's
We
do
got leeway
some
on guest episode there.
right. Let's do some quick last tidbits, last
Okay.
thoughts.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. Big thing is, and I can speak from the parent perspective. My thoughts are for the parents listening, or guardians and or child advocates. Well, everybody's a child advocate, but never mind. Trust your gut. Don't be afraid to push. Acknowledge that these teachers and people are doing the best that they can because they really are. That doesn't mean that you can't hold people accountable. That doesn't mean you cannot push for the things that your child needs. And please keep your child involved in the process so that they can advocate for the things that they need. Make sure you have conversations before you go into the meeting with your child so that you can talk through their thoughts and feelings because you don't want to be processing that with your 6-year-old in the middle of the meeting. But trust your gut. You can do this. I believe in you.
Very wise. I will share, ask why. Why is this happening? Who does it serve? What else is possible? Rarely accept the first explanation. There's often other possibilities that aren't being tapped. And because families don't know their rights, they don't know to keep asking. You have a right to ask as many times as you feel called to do so.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for listening to Drudgery Dreams and In Between, a weekly live podcast coming to you every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Pacific. If you're catching this live on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel for updates when we're back here next week. For all you podcast geeks, subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We're on all of them. If you'd like to support the podcast, be sure to leave a rating and review and share with your friends. To catch all of the latest from us, visit us at drudgeryanddreams.com and follow on your favorite social media platforms at Drudgery and Dreams. Thanks again. See you next time.
See ya.